Hi, my name is Lily Gallman, and let's talk about motherhood during Italian fascism. During Italian fascism, motherhood was not just a personal role, it became a political mission. Benito Mussolini's regime sought to redefine women's lives to serve the state's nationalist goals. Central to this was the battle for births, a demographic campaign aimed at drastically increasing Italy's population to fuel its imperial ambitions. Women were cast as the mothers of the nation, their primary role being to produce and raise the fascists of tomorrow. But what did this vision mean for Italian women? And how did the regime's policies shape their everyday lives, their identities, and their sense of self-worth? Lauren Fercucci explains in her article that the battle for births took place during the interwar years from 1925 to 1938. Mussolini believed that a larger population was essential for Italy's power, both economically and militarily. He aimed to grow the population from 40 million to 60 million by 1950, emphasizing the need for large families as a patriotic duty. The regime associated motherhood with maintaining national greatness, promoting fertility as a virtue. To insensitize this, the government provided tax breaks, better health care, and welfare benefits, particularly targeting working-class families. Women who bore more than 5 children were awarded public recognition, including prestigious medals, in an attempt to glorify their role in building the future of fascist Italy. Now, this wasn't just about encouraging childbirth. It was about creating loyalty to the regime. Mussolini wanted these mothers to raise their children as devout fascists, ensuring the state's ideology would live on through the next generation. This slide shows numerous examples of propaganda posters used to promote fertility in women, and in the middle of the slide, there is an example of the medals given to mothers who bore 5 children. However, the reality for many women was starkly different from the idealized image promoted by the state. To align women's lives with these goals, the fascist regime redefined their role in society. Propaganda promoted the image of the ideal mother, a woman who was devoted to her family and her nation, selfless, nurturing, and above all, obedient to the state. This ideal was enforced through policies that pushed women out of the workforce and back into the home. Laws were introduced to limit the number of women employed in public roles, with the 1938 legislation capping female employment in certain sectors at just 10%. The regime believed that a woman's value lay not in her independence or contributions outside the home, but in her ability to raise children who would serve fascism. Fascist Italy by Karima Moyer-Noci. In poorer families, economic struggles made raising large families difficult. The use of wet nurses was common in both upper and lower classes, though for different reasons. Wealthier families often hired live-in wet nurses, while in poorer families, mothers with insufficient nutrition were unable to nurse their children. It wasn't uncommon for children from impoverished families to remain with their wet nurses' families if they bonded and if the nurses' households were better off. This dynamic highlights the vast social and economic disparities that existed, even as the state tried to impose a uniform vision of motherhood. The fascist regime glorified the image of the ideal mother, a selfless, nurturing woman who prioritized her family and the nation. This ideal wasn't just cultural, but deeply political. Mothers were expected to produce and raise children as loyal fascists, shaping them into future workers, soldiers, and citizens who would carry the regime's ideals forward. Propaganda linked motherhood to national duty, portraying childless women as selfish or unpatriotic. For those who adhered to the regime's expectations, public ceremonies and medals recognized their sacrifices. And these gestures were designed to inspire loyalty, but they also served as a reminder that a woman's value was tied to her fertility and devotion to the state. While these policies aimed to boost population growth, they largely failed to address the economic realities faced by many families. The campaign's promises of financial support and improved health care were inconsistently implemented. Large families often struggled to make ends meet, especially in rural and working-class areas where resources were scarce. promised financial rewards often failed to materialize or were insufficient to address the challenges faced by these families. Mothers were left to carry the weight of the state's demands with little support, and for many, this created a deep sense of exhaustion and frustration. They were expected to embody the idealized image of the self-sacrificing mother, but the state offered little in return to help them succeed in that role. In Female Family Heads in Fascist Italy, a study of the 1931 population census, Marco Bresci and Alessio Fornasin state female heads of families, particularly widows, were among those who struggled the most. These women were especially common in the very rich and the very poor, and their distribution varied regionally, in the north and south of Italy, as well as in cities. Female family heads face unique challenges, balancing societal expectations with the financial strain of running a household. Despite the state's rhetoric of support, many women felt abandoned by the very system that demanded so much of them. The regime enforced its vision of motherhood with strict reproductive policies. Contraception and abortion were outlawed, with harsh penalties for those who defied these bans. Women's bodies became a battleground for the state's demographic goals, stripping them of autonomy. Propaganda portrayed family planning as anti-Italian, casting women who sought control over their reproductive choices as enemies of the nation. These measures, combined with economic hardships, created a sense of powerlessness amongst many women, as their personal agency was sacrificed for the state's nationalist agenda. Now, despite the regime's efforts, the battle for births failed to meet its population targets, and by 1938, birth rates had not significantly increased. Economic instability, regional disparities, and widespread resistance to the state's intrusion into private life undermined the entire campaign. Mussolini's dream of producing a generation of fascists of tomorrow faltered, as the realities of poverty and exhaustion outweighed the state's rhetoric. However, the campaign did succeed in one way. It entrenched the idea that motherhood was central to women's identity, a legacy that outlived fascism and influenced societal expectations for decades to come. The fascist regime's policies towards motherhood reveal how personal roles can be politicized to serve broader ideological goals. By tying women's identities and self-worth to their fertility, the regime sought to use their lives as tools for nationalist ambition. For many women, this meant navigating impossible expectations, economic hardship, and a lack of autonomy. Today, as we reflect on this history, we are reminded of the importance of protecting personal freedoms and ensuring that no one's identity is reduced to their utility to the state. The story of motherhood during fascism is a cautionary tale, a reminder of the resilience of women and the ongoing fight for autonomy.